about grabby aliens. Or saw a video talking about grabby aliens by Rational Animations. Humanity was born way ahead of time. The reason why? Grabby aliens. That's not how you make assumptions. The way that this works, okay? First, you assess the ideas of what in this universe, based on how everything was developed, you look at how many planets out there could have possibly formed life and the possibilities of them forming life and the stuff that could have gotten in the way of forming life. What this person did and mentioned a study of is that there is this assumption that aliens are grabby, and so we wouldn't find all sorts of species, we would find just a few. It doesn't matter how many types of alien exposed species there are, if they're out there grabbing like a star or something, we would be able to notice it. The truth is, if they're going to be out there at all, they're going to be hidden. I made the easy assumption that let's take a duplicate of Earth, the exact same scenario that everyone experienced here, and take the beginning and just copy and paste it over to any other planetoid system that gives it the right amount of light from its star and the right amount of stuff in the planet. Fermi paradox that, and boom, you have a possibility of that happening. But then you have to consider what it would take for life to actually develop. Now, here's the thing. Even if a civilization could have formed 1,000 years or 10,000 years before us, which is the literal maximum, the actual most time we can possibly assume, simply giving our own time period to them, because we are possibly, if at all, the first species that could have ever been developed. Just based on the fact that the universe can only develop so quickly, the planets can only form so well, and the situations for those planets can only be so good. So once it got to that point where in the universe life could have formed, and we are obviously the earliest types of forms of life that could have existed, saying 1 billion years, really, you would have to find a way to figure out mathematically and scientifically how species could have possibly speed run the system in order to get to an intelligent species similar to us faster than what happened on our planet. And as a happy little caveat, I just say, let's give them 1,000 years to or fro. And hell, you could easily give us 10,000 years of cognitive development just boosting, because really, who cares about what people think? You could have had societies all the way up to planetary stage after the first couple thousand years of being human society. So let's pretend that in a duplicate of us, we go back and we see that there is ancient space-bearing version copies of ourselves, not on this planet but on another planet. They got everything else that we had. The only difference is there were maybe different amounts of species, different amounts of selection that could have happened, that for whatever reason it was easier for us to be able to communicate. It was easier for us to learn how to do things like write and share information, or easier for us to be able to, because even if you don't have a language, the ability to simply carve stuff out on stone is what most people could assume is the first types of communication, not even words. But what if you have species that immediately form language, as is said in the Holy Scriptures of the Bible, or whatever you want to pick, Quran and Torah and what have you. Torah is the Bible. Forget it. The point is that if you start off with species capable of cognizant thought enough to speak and be able to work with each other, then you don't have people separating their languages, no weird war, no weird whatever else, and that's it, just a sociological experiment. Then you assume that if everyone were to work together for some reason or another and actually create the better technologies and whatnot, then they would be able to look into things like how to make glass sooner, how to make the Bronze Age sooner, how to make the Iron Age sooner. And just by simply exploring enough, like, you realize, I don't know how long we've had iron before we had even gunpowder, which is crazy. But like the ability to be able to mine stuff out by sheer force of will with pickaxes or whatever else you can think of, or if people were to figure out about acids, chemicals, explosives, freaky compounds, and chemistry way sooner. Like, just pretend that society was developed and we end up going from like a couple, just give, my estimate is if you could even give us 1,000 extra years of, or 1,000 earlier years of development. Like, just imagine us now, but 1,000 years later. My comment in the video comments of this guy, the comment that I left was, we would be gods. Big G, not little g, flat out, we would be just big G gods in 1,000 years. There's no way we wouldn't, because we would have the nanotechnology. Like, just starting from now, you go 1,000 years into this future, we're going to have artificial intelligence. We're going to have extreme amounts of control of all sorts of chemical, biological, and forms of energy production that we technically have only theorized about, because stuff like antimatter is like hardly even in at all the productive phase, even though it would be the most extreme amounts of anything. But it's like, if you can think about us going 1,000 years from now, we will simply be able to be harnessing the power of whatever we want here. Now, the thing is, we look up into the sky, we see absolutely nothing. There's complete emptiness out there. There's just hardly a microbe to even notice. And if we could ever even find microbes, then they are literally millions or billions of years from ever becoming like us. So the idea of ever finding another actual civilization is honestly a lot more slim than people say. Although, yeah, it could easily have happened. Just magic, coincidence, another Earth, anywhere in the universe. It has to have possibly happened. But then, even given an exact copy of the Earth happens somewhere, anywhere else, and we get to humanoids, we get to spacefaring, and we give us 1,000 years of development past where we are right now. I'm I'm very like it's very crazy to think of me living here now. We're in one of the best civilizations that has ever been. And that's crazy. It's also one of like some terrible situations and whatever else, blah blah blah. But like there are so many other civilizations that'll happen later. Um I think somewhere in the video they say that the Earth will be uninhabitable, and then after that, the a billion years from now, the Earth will be uninhabitable, and if nothing's done, which is just, it's a stupid statement. No one would ever leave. The Earth is already progressing into something that's more sustainable and less hazardous to itself, because the species is already made a choice to take off stuff that breaks the ozone layer off the shelf, and it's not there anymore. And we're already trying to fight climate change and stuff. Okay, again. Um, so the idea is that what? No, I don't. There's no way. See, I can be heard. I am there. Also, I have other live streams that are apparently also happening simultaneous to this one. Where are they? Where is this live stream? There they are. There are two other live streams happening at the same time. I am simultaneous. Um, it'd be interesting to do just so many premieres simultaneously, so much that like all the videos that I have of one day, and they all happen to be like, oh, if you want to see part one, here it is. And part two, here it is in a half hour from now. Part three, here it is again. It's just how it works. Only these videos are like extremely long. They're not a half hour long. They're not an hour long. They're like 4 hours long. Why am I making these videos? Anyway, so the concept of if you have a society that is 1,000 years into our future, just out there, as the literal most generous that I feel I can be, because like think about it, in order to get to where we are now, all sorts of other stuff was happening. Even the wars kind of progressed us faster into the where we are now, because certain things were made into production faster, certain things were researched faster, and certain things were just um, like instead of back burner, they were right up there, front center. We had it. Um, it's crazy we didn't obliterate ourselves, but we could have, and it's crazy to think that the wars actually did a good, besides the fact that they were here or there, whatever you think about war and how um, right or wrong it is to have war in the world. development happened. And I feel like at this point, development would happen no matter what. But I feel like other wars are starting to possibly start up because we're going to talk about asteroids eventually and get out there and start taking those. And then we're going to have asteroid wars. And like, who owns a rock? You know, it's a massive rock. We're going to be up there drilling whatever stuff. And like, I feel like, I think I said, and here's the thing, Elon Musk said that there is no way to make a space elevator with the technology that we have. And I said Zeppelins. Is that why I lost my channel? I don't know. Is it? I said Zeppelins. Because if you think about it, if you make a hot air balloon platform big enough, no matter what you put under it, every segment doesn't have to be thicker and thicker in order to hold up the next segment. It just has to be held up by a lot of air. And if you have like a gigantic size of like an entire city or size of an entire just a city or even a town structure that is using air to hold itself up, you know, you'd have to have like, you wouldn't make like one column and have it just rise up. No, you would have like, it would be like a hive, and you'd have these segments where there's air able to flow through and lift up the rest of the segments. So you'd literally be incorporating a gigantic amount of like open bubbles, and a lot of closed bubbles that would have the lighter than air stuff and have like whatever you want, so that using literally the idea of using air as the strength and support of an entire building is not far-fetched. We have Zeppelins, we have gigantic airships. There's no reason to assume we can't just make a building out of a gigantic section that is, the majority is Zeppelin, and then stack those so that we end up with more and more and more as we go up. Eventually, once we get up to the lower atmosphere areas, we'll have to have bigger sections of air, more vivacious lifting systems. But the general idea is that we're going to have the ability to do that anyway. And we'll be closer and we'll be above the clouds and everything. So we will literally have the ability to have a larger amount of solar power powering this bad boy. So I don't think of a single cable when I think of a space elevator. I think about something the size of a few square kilometers. Absolutely gigantic. Right? Like literally square kilometers of structure, all being held up by air. Just billows and billows of air. And it depends on how many. Like each segment would have its own set of lifting pods. Each one would have their own strengths. It would be all. The problem is if you remove one segment, like if you break one thing, the idea you would imagine is that you're going to end up with collapse of literally any other structure. That's where you're wrong. These are zeppelins that are self-sustaining, capable of holding themselves up. And they're all interlinked. They're not holding up each other. Air is holding up the entire structure separately. This is the crazy idea. You have like this giant structure, as big as you like, right? And then the next large chunk is air. And then you have a bunch of filaments that are holding everything together, so it's similar to each other, right? And kind of rigid, but in general, it just keeps on building up and up and up with many sandwiches of air and structure. So you end up with kind of like a backbone, right? The air literally becomes the muscle that is holding up the entire backbone. And that backbone would lead all the way up into space. Now you can build this as small as a city block or as big as an entire city. I would suggest going big, personally. And the general idea is you could easily have, the thing is, the entire structure would be able to have, like, the idea of having a single wire of any tensile strength hold this structure is just, it's astronomically not feasible. That's why I say go bigger. Go even bigger. Because at some point, you're going to end up with the amount of wires everywhere all together are going to have a fraction of the amount of stress. The bigger you go by any volume, right? The square cube law, basically. Circle sphere law. You only, like, the next layer bigger that you go, it'll become easier and easier to have this kind of structure. The only thing is you have to make a gigantic, like, mega structure. And the main idea of having all of this held by air, like, it's something when you have a small section of, when you have a very small pillar the size of current skyscrapers, and you're trying to make something that's going up into space, you're not going to do it. You're just not going to have it. But if you have something big enough, beefy enough, self-lifty enough, that you have enough heat, you have hot air, or you have enough helium, or however you can do it, that you can lift stuff up. Like magnets, screw magnets. You can't do this with magnets. Don't even think about doing this with magnets. You're doing this with buoyancy force, and that's basically it. For every section of air that it becomes a less amount of air by a certain amount of magnitude, you're going to have to up the size. Literally be, instead of becoming a point as you go to space, you're going to get wider and wider. And the anti-gravity or buoyancy force, or hot air balloon that you would like to have, right? They made a hot air balloon that was self-sustaining in cloudy weather. All it took was a certain amount of heat on one side and a certain amount of, or a certain amount of, they had, what did they do? One side of the balloon collected all the heat and the other side reflected all the heat. So you ended up with a self-sustaining hot air balloon. It's not even powered by electricity, just by the sun beaming down on it at all, even in cloudy days, which means that it would have to be dark, or it would have to be really, like, if you multiply those balloons by a factor of 10,000, you could easily have a space elevator. Something that could lift its way all the way up. And then then all you have to do is that will make the stability for the majority of everything that is in the lower atmospheres. And then once you get up to the higher atmospheres, everything's held up by the anchors out in space. Anchors, multiple. You wouldn't just have one anchor, you would have multiple. They would be in a grid formation. Having one anchor, one wire, is cheap. Or I should say, it's expensive. You realize that regular bridges have so many wires holding up one section of bridge. Why would we not do the same thing? You would need so many wires, all separate, all in rows, large amounts, or whatever. Yeah, in order to do it, we would have to have so much more metal than we would ever want. But we would also want to have stuff that isn't going to just break randomly. Like, we would have to have stuff that can self-heal. Now, the only construction that has ever been done with self-healing is some kind of weird concrete, and it's like a patchwork job that is like only going to help you so far. For something as big as a space elevator, the size of city blocks, the size of an entire town, or multiple square kilometers, we're going to need something a lot more robust. But that's where nanotechnology can come in. All over the place, you can easily have it so that there's material being made, also powered by the sun. We can have these greenhouses or whatever else to be able to make materials. We can have it so that those materials can be transmuted through all sorts of different methods. Yes, I'm over exaggerating about how ability we have to transmute items from organic processes. But think about it. It would be possible to do that. And then eventually you have everything be able to regenerate itself, everything be able to repair itself on its own. It cannot be something that is like managed. This is an automated system only. Even the idea of a single string or the single multiple strings is just absolutely ridiculous. Because the cable, they say the cable would have to be so big and whatever else. So just literally make multiple cables. How much easier is it to do that? You know, multiple cables, you can have all of the different sections all held together in bundles. Like, you clearly wouldn't need to have a system that goes all the way up in a single go. Although it'd be nice to do that, and the best way to do that is not a climber. All you would have to do is pretend that you have an anchor that's out in space, right? Holding whatever it is that you're holding in place. And on one section on the ground, you have your single item, right? And then you have a counterweight that once it goes out and once released, once you release the entire tether, it just yanks the entire thing straight up. And we hope we can stop it in time so it doesn't just immediately snap once it's all the way up there. We would slow the rock down, and we would slow the cable down once it gets closer to being up there. But you would be able to go at extreme speeds using this kind of an elevator system, because all you'd have is an asteroid that immediately, once it's let go of the Earth, then it just goes up, right? And all you want, and all you ever need, is a cable system that can also make it so that once you have it go up, another set of asteroids or whatever else can bring it back down again, right? Like a gigantic elevator weight. Only difference is, instead of you literally wouldn't literally, that's how elevators work in a sense. You use the gravitational force of one weight pulling down with the force of gravity against and much greater than the force of whatever is pulling down the elevator itself. And with pulley systems and such, you can have it so that it works even easier. But instead of having a pulley system like that, I just say you have on one end the object you want to move, the other end is the weight that is pulling away from the Earth. In order to go back down, you'd have to weigh it down or pull it back in. And to do that, you could just yank it back in. Like, you'd have to have either a very strong amount of force, or you could have rockets on the asteroid to send it back. Probably would need rockets. Like, the amount of force projected for this, like, even if you want to move something at, say, 5 kilometers an hour all the way up the elevator, right? That, just having that amount of wire, or just constant motion, tension, and whenever it would stop, like, you'd want it to slow down very, very, very gradually over the course of kilometers, depending on whatever speeds it ends up getting to. Eventually, it just get up to like crazy speed, possibly, and then go down to normal, rational speeds. And it depends on how much tension and stuff you can have it work on. And yeah, a climber is much more sustainable than that silly idea, because then you just have to pull your way up. But still, having multiple structures for the pillars to go up is much better than just one, I would think. Anyway, space elevator stuff aside, the idea of aliens being noticeable out there, once we become gods, we're not going to, if we want to not be noticed by other aliens because we assume they might want to get our stuff, we're going to end up protecting ourselves from ever being noticed whatsoever. And the best thing that could notice anything is, like the first example I gave was X-rays. Well, we already know how to counteract X-rays, lead or something, right? So we would have a certain amount of lead, or we would have a certain amount of whatever, And then the other idea is like neutrinos, which go for everything. So we would have to have something else much better that would be able to. But when you get to 1,000 years beyond right now, there's no reason why a civilization wouldn't be able to do that. So it's much more likely that a civilization, if they want to be hidden, they're just hidden. And there's nothing you can say or do about it. Anyway, this has been a Science Me video. One I haven't made these in a while because I don't know. I didn't have anything to pull apart. But it's like I remember I need to redo all my Science Me videos from all of the different things. And I don't remember anything about that. Which reminds me, I've got to put this in the playlist. There it is. So thanks for hanging out with me. Check out the rest of the playlist of Science Me, and I'll talk about other things. Like, for example, did you know that if you're heavier, you float? Think about that, because it's unintuitive. I'll say it again in a short. You are heavier and you float. I bet you $1,000,000 I'm right. I bet you $1,000,000 I am right.